welcome to Southsea.
Happy to be here. Finally.
Yeah, it's been a while.
A few years later.
So, I try to kind of gauge this interview by asking you questions that maybe haven't been asked in other ones on YouTube.
All right, because I feel like I've been asked everything, so all right, let's see.
Well, that's a bit of a challenge. Right. Okay, so when you talked about the foundation of Dharma punks and Against the Stream, you talked about how you felt punk rock and other subcultures and Buddhism were founded upon the same quality of dissatisfaction with the status quo. Could you talk just a little bit about this and how Against the Stream as a moniker, if you like, is an appropriate use of this phrase within the practice and within the foundation, what you've set out?
Well, so Against the Stream comes from, as you know, it comes from the just after the Buddha's enlightenment, when he was reflecting on how did I get to this place where I'm no longer meeting pleasure with attachment, no longer meeting pain with aversion, no longer being so self-centered. And in his own reflection, he said, I went against the stream. I went against delusional self-centeredness. I went against hatred. I went against greed and clinging and attachment. And I came to this place of peace and contentment, happiness, well-being. So, his whole idea was about, rebelling against, the status quo. And the status quo was greed for pleasure, hatred towards pain, and a self-obsessed belief in a permanent I, me, mine. And so it just feels like that's the foundation of, original early Buddhism. And then, for punk, it feels like that's what every counterculture movement is coming out of, some level of dissatisfaction, rejection of corruption, oppression, greed, hatred, war, ignorance, that comes from the individual, but then gets manifest in groups and cultures and political systems and, institutionalized racism and sexism. And so it's all coming from the individual's craving for pleasure and aversion to pain. And so the Buddha says from the inside, we rebel. And then that way we actually create a revolutionary movement in the world from the inside out.
And when you talked about there being some kind of aggressive wisdom around the language and ideas within punk rock and, say, hip-hop and things, around oppression and ignorance, you said, I think in an interview I saw once, you said, but you felt as though your generation kind of stopped at that point. So I'm just wondering what you got out of Buddhist meditation practice that you weren't getting out of the subculture that you've come from, the kind of Santa Cruz punk rock scene.
Right. Yeah, I've always felt like that. Like I got an education in punk rock that was, pointing out oppression, pointing out ignorance, pointing out the failings of the hippie generation who got engaged but then sold out to kind of capitalist, bourgeois life. And that, there was all of this kind of scathing critique that we're really good at in punk rock, like really good at in kind of pointing out the problem, but there wasn't a lot of solution, especially the kind of genre of punks that I was with, which was much more the live fast, die young, self-destructive, anarchist, create chaos kind of movement. Yeah. There was a whole level of kind of active peace punks. We used to call them peace punks, who were the ones that were actually doing something good and were politically active and socially engaged, but we saw them as a little too hippie. They weren't quite aggressive enough for us. They were a little, too much crass peace punks. So, I came from the other kind of side of a little bit more, violent and aggressive. So it wasn't really until I got clean, got into recovery and started practicing meditation that I started to see, there is actually a cause of this suffering, and it starts from the inside. Mm-hmm. And there is actually a solution, and that through compassion, forgiveness, mindfulness, we can actually change our relationship to pain. And then actually we can do something about it in the world too, sure, by helping other people wake up in this way, and then also just by being engaged and socially active.
Mm-hmm. And when that kind of change started happening for you, I'm just curious, there's a scene in your Meditate and Destroy documentary where you're outside a Good Riddance show at the Catalyst Club, and you're talking to somebody about kind of what's going on, and he seems quite skeptical at the time when he was asking you, where do you want this to go? And your response is, you want it to be a total personal, spiritual, and cultural revolution. And I'm just wondering where you feel you are and the Against Stream movement is on that original intention.
Sandra, I wonder how long ago that was. That must have been 10 years ago or something like that.
Over a decade, probably.
You know, and that I remember that scene, and that scene is with a guy that like I grew up with, and that there's always been a little bit of kind of banter. And he's interesting. I think I even say something in that scene about like saved your life, you know, like this was a guy who I looked up to, who was a punk, who was a skinhead, who was like an English rocker. Like we kind of went through all of these. He was in this like United Rockers, which was like this British rock bike gang that was all punks and skins that had gone to like Ace Cafe, rockabilly kind of style, you know, and we all had motorcycles, but he was a bad alcoholic, and I got sober first, and then he came around later and got sober, and I helped him, and you know, so that kind of, I want this to be total personal inner revolution that is changing. You know, I have a lot of high ideals, and I think Buddhism has a lot of high ideals. You know, we're always saying for the benefit of all living beings. You know, there's the teaching in the simile of the cloth where the Buddha says, through this process of purification, you will become a refuge for all living beings. And it's this super high ideal, and then there's the reality is, actually, I help a few people. You know, there's the ripple effect of actually, you know, I practice kindness and compassion, and I affect some positive change in my family and a little bit in my subculture, and but there's these rippling effects. As far as like big, you know, universal change, I don't have a lot of confidence in big sort of world-shattering, changing things. I keep it much more grounded in like individual, like am I helping this person, and then is this person going to help others, and that's really the way that it gets passed on.
And that friend that you were talking about, the kind of I sense that skepticism in him.
Yeah.
And I know he may have been that one individual, but I'm just wondering when you started changing your behaviour, it was clear around your kind of friends, if there was any aversion or kind of skepticism around that kind of change from the Noah they grew up with in Santa Cruz. And
yeah, for sure. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but I think most of us have experienced this kind of like when it's so easy, especially in your hometown, to get stuck in, oh, but you used to be that guy.
Yeah.
And so you'll always sort of be that type of violent, dishonest, whatever sort of person that you were, and it's easy to get stuck in that, even though it's like, oh, I'm actually not that person anymore. I don't behave like that. I don't show up like that. That's not what this is about. It's not another fashion. It's actually something that I really believe in, that I'm really trying to practice and embody. So yeah, definitely I run into skepticism. Although I've been really pleasantly surprised at how many people from the punk scene, from skate, surf, hip hop, whatever, like have shown up, from the graffiti scene, whatever, have shown up and said, oh, I'm interested in this too. Yeah. And the kind of unlikely characters. And then for me, it's always been really fun when, like, you know, people from the bands that I grew up listening to show up to meditation. I think last time I was in London, the woman that was in Crass showed up to my day long. Yeah. And I was just like, I wasn't a huge fan, but of course I know who you are, and I grew up listening to Crass some. And, you know, so like that kind of experience keeps happening, which is just like, okay, yeah, we're on the right track, and this is helping so many people. And so many people that have nothing to do with the punk scene, that it doesn't have to be that subculture. That happens to be where I come from, but that's not where most of the people in our community come from. And I think this is important because sometimes we get stereotyped. Even yesterday at this thing I was doing in London, a guy who lives, I think he lives in Brighton, I said, you know, there's a group down there that you can connect with. He's like, yeah, but I didn't know if I had enough tattoos or if I was punk enough to be part of that group. Right. And I said, you know, it's just, that's missing the point. It has nothing to do with style or cultural, you know, counterculture. This is like, are you interested in mindfulness? Are you interested in healing and recovering? You're welcome. It has nothing to do with your fashion choices. You know, and at our groups, and I'm sure your groups down here in Southsea too, it's very diverse, you know, and I have the little old ladies and the psychologists and the physicians and the lawyers, along with the, you know, face piercing, you know, it's quite mixed. Yeah, it's quite mixed.
Talking more general now, I have a strong opinion around, so I just kind of want to gauge what your opinion or your experiences of this. That when I talk to people around, or people talk to me around meditation, they're interested, they've never tried it before. The most common misconception I encounter is this kind of quietening the mind perception, I think, around what meditation should be, and I think it's perpetuated from things like Time magazine having this image of a white female kind of blissing out on the front cover. And then you have people, they try, they can't quieten the mind, they give up, or they have some kind of really pleasant experience, and then they struggle getting back there on like the second or third attempt. And I heard you once saying around, you know, it's the same as going into a music shop, picking up like a violin, trying, can't do it, put it down. It's the same thing, it requires practice. I'm just wondering if you could talk a bit more about that, but particularly around this kind of misconception around quietening the mind, and actually how you've addressed that when you've engaged with that.
Right. Yeah, of course I hear that often. It is the most common idea that people have, and I'm not even sure exactly where it comes from. There must have somehow it got Zen became stillness, and meditation became Om and quieting the mind, and for whatever reason. And of course, as we both know, in long-term meditation, there will be states of mind that are very calm and tranquil, but it's not really the goal. It's not really the point. So I generally just try to educate people and say, you know, you'll have some of those experiences, that'll be part of it, but just, you know, in a really brief way, say this is about changing your relationship to the causes of suffering, not ignoring them or avoiding them, but having a really engaged relationship with pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and changing a relationship, developing compassion. So just in a really brief way explaining that to people, and a lot of people say, okay, cool, I want that. You know, quieting the mind sounds a little unrealistic, but having compassion, that's something that I need. Having non-attachment, that's something that I need, because I suffer so much about clinging. I want to learn how to let go.
There's almost like a connotation with the quieting the mind, isn't there, that actually if I quiet my mind I won't feel the difficult stuff.
Yeah, and that it'll somehow be pleasant. And my experience was when my mind started getting quiet, it wasn't that pleasant. It was a little bit boring. It was a little too neutral. I thought I was hoping that spiritual experience was going to be more exciting than this. And so I was like, hey, calm mind.
Now what?
Yeah, big deal.
And kind of building on from that, we were talking in Pine Barn earlier about this kind of secularization, and it's a real big topic, and it's been talked about a lot. But I want to take the opportunity to get from your perspective what you feel the key difference is between secular and Buddhist mindfulness, because you've got experience with MBA, and also you're running Refuge Recovery, which is the Buddhist model to recovery. And I think we agree that it depends on who's delivering it in terms of the variant and the integrity around making a nod to Buddhism.
Right.
But I'm just wondering what you think the key differences are.
Well, there can be several key differences. One is karma and kind of ethical behavior addressed at all. The fact that we're responsible for our actions, and that negative actions don't only lead to stress, but that we're karmically responsible for them. So how are ethics addressed? Sometimes in secular it's not. It's just mindful stress reduction.
Right action.
Yeah. How are you speaking? How are you acting? You know, how is your relationship to sexuality, your relationship to money? All of those areas where we suffer and we cause harm to others. So sometimes in the secular, that's not addressed the way that it's really clearly addressed in Buddhism. And then there's the more kind of karma rebirth. You know, like Buddhism is this multiple life, teaching that many of us Buddhist teachers don't talk about that much, but it is part of Buddhism. And in secular, it's not going to be part of it at all. And, a lot of us would say, well, it's not that important, so you can leave that out anyways.
Yeah.
So I think those are some of the key differences. Ethics, karma, rebirth.
Do you think it affects the quality of the teaching of secular mindfulness when right livelihood and Panyo and things are left out? When there's retreats going on in Goldman Sachs and Google and things, because I'm sure John Kabat-Zinn didn't really talk about right livelihood when he did a retreat with Goldman Sachs, for example,
Right.
or.
Yeah, I'm sure that it does, but I always come back to, for the record, and I think you know this, I'm in support of secular mindfulness. I don't do it much myself, although I do have the Juvenile Hall project, but I'm in support of it. I think that like getting anybody to meditate in whatever way you can get them to meditate is a good thing. So personally, I think I'm happy that it happens. And then also kind of going back pre-Buddhism to Siddhartha Gautama, who wasn't a Buddhist and didn't know about all of these Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path, he discovered mindfulness. And through present time awareness of mindfulness, changed his relationship to pleasure, changed his relationship to pain, changed his relationship to his own mind. And that led to an ethical way of being, to these understandings and this engagement. And then he taught the Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path. But that came out of mindfulness. Yeah. So there's a part of me, like Zen Buddhism or something, where you don't get a lot of teachings. They say stare at the wall and pay attention. And by being present and by paying attention, often actually you'll learn what you need to know if you take it to a deep place. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe only a small percentage of people that learn mindfulness are going to really go for it and take it to a deep place. More people introduced, the better. Now, for me, I want the whole package. I want Buddhism.
Yeah.
But I'm happy that people are getting introduced to Buddhism and calling it mindfulness. I'm happy. Yeah, I mean, there's some terrible teachers.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people out there saying I'm teaching mindfulness, or I'm a mindfulness therapist, or I'm, whatever, and they have no idea what they're talking about, and they've never, I've been doing all of this yoga world stuff, and I'm out on these yoga, and all of these people come up to me and they say, oh, I'm a meditation teacher, and I say, oh, cool, who are your teachers, where have you done retreat? And they say, oh, I've never been on retreat, I learned how to teach meditation in my 200-hour yoga teacher training, and now I teach meditation. And it's like, oh, you don't actually know how to meditate, but you're teaching other people? Okay, so there's too much of that. There's not enough quality control of really depth, experienced meditation teachers. And so it happens in mindfulness, it happens in the yoga world. It's nothing we can do about it, but it's unfortunate because some really sincere people who say, I want to learn meditation, show up to somebody that doesn't know how to teach them meditation and get disillusioned.
As someone who's got a lot of experience of building Sangha and how it's kind of spread across America, what would you say the key challenges are to contemporary practice in terms of building Sangha, both practical challenges and spiritual challenges around that?
All of what happened with Dharma punks, Against the Stream, Refuge recovery, it all just feels really organic. I think that from the outside I look like I'm ambitious and I created this big sort of international movement, but I didn't really mean to do that. All I did was the Dharma helped me so much. And then at some point my teacher said, start teaching. And I said, okay, I'll start teaching. And then and I wrote some books, and then that kind of grew. And then people like you came to me and said, I don't have a community. I said, you should totally have a community. And it just kind of was so organic. I never sat down with a plan to create national, international communities and meditation centers, or I just said, this has helped me. I want to make it available to my generation, to others. And it just feels like it really kind of happened by itself. So I don't feel like I've run into that many challenges with it. It's, maybe one, an earlier question, one of the things is that sometimes I was a little quick to say to some people, you should just start a group. Because I had that 12-step conditioning too that was one addict helping another addict. And so sometimes, and there have been a few times where there's people who I've said, you should start a group, who totally shouldn't start a group because they're not going to stay clean or they're not in integrity. So there's been some missteps in my overconfidence in others of sometimes feeling sure, anybody can do this. And so I did step back about 10 years ago and start training people and saying, actually, you should come through this facilitator training, teacher training, refuge recovery training, whatever it is, so that you have some support and some accountability in the process.
Have you seen the latest copy of Buddha Dharma?
Yeah, I think so.
Tara Brach, it's all kind of dedicated towards diversity within Sanghas.
Uh-huh.
And I know
white privilege,
but also
the power dynamics.
Yeah, and I know Joanne has started off people of colour Sangha within TS, and it's a conversation we're having now within our community. And I'm conscious of two white guys here talking about meditation and building sanghas. Is that an area, do you think, that's kind of needs attention within westernized sanghas?
It does, and our sangha and so many sanghas are trying to do something, and it's a little difficult when you set up a kind of predominantly middle class white community and then say, hey, how come there's no diversity here, and let's invite diversity into this not really welcoming community, when communities aren't started in a diverse way from the beginning. So back to that earlier question, that is an important thing, that my own white blindness and my own white privilege, I wasn't as conscious about diversity. I was really just looking at oh, you want this, are you qualified? And it was mostly mostly white folks that were showing up, so our community became pretty white. Although the Against the Stream Dharma punks community in the West was one of the more diverse communities, actually. People would come and they say, well, you have more people of color and you have more gay, lesbian, queer community and more trans sort of acceptance. And so in some ways we were looking very diverse for a while there. But as far as people of color, it's not that diverse. And so we're actively working on it and have teachers that are actively engaging with the conversation around it and training our teachers in white privilege and what that means and how it manifests. And
it seems to be a topic that's not really talked about much within the community, within the practicing Buddhist community, I find.
It's happening more and more. I feel like every community in America anyways is addressing it.
Dude, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Yeah.